If you are reading this, it is because my story has reached your hands. I am not a superstitious man, nor do I believe in the ghost stories told around campfires. I have served in the Mexican army for over 20 years and have seen things few could imagine. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened to us in the Chiapas jungle. I grew up in a small town in northern Mexico where life was hard and opportunities were scarce. From a young age, I knew the army was my way to escape poverty and give my family a better life. So, at 18, I enlisted and left everything I knew behind. The military discipline and the missions assigned to me shaped and hardened me, but also gave me a purpose. My team, which we called the Jaguars, was my second family. Each of us had our reasons for being there, but we all shared the same goal: to protect our country and our people. We had faced drug traffickers, guerrillas, and all kinds of dangers in the jungle, but the mission we were assigned this time was different. We were sent to investigate reports of unusual activities in a remote area of the jungle. Local inhabitants spoke of a path that had appeared out of nowhere, one that no one remembered seeing before. Some said it was cursed, that those who followed it never returned. But as soldiers, we could not be swayed by superstitions. On the first day of the mission, everything seemed normal. We ventured into the jungle, following the coordinates we had been given. The humidity and heat were suffocating, and the constant sound of insects and animals surrounded us. But we were all used to those conditions. What we didn't expect was what we would find at nightfall. As we set up camp, Corporal Cuevas, one of the youngest in the group, pointed at something among the trees. "Sergeant, look at that," he said, with a mix of curiosity and fear in his voice. There, in the middle of the darkness, was a narrow path barely visible in the light of our flashlights. "Does anyone remember seeing this on the map?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Everyone shook their heads. "It must be the path the locals talked about," commented Lieutenant Ruiz. "What do we do, Sergeant?" "We explore," I replied, trying to hide my own unease. "We divide into two groups and proceed with caution." We ventured into the path, advancing in silence and with heightened senses. The vegetation seemed denser and more oppressive as we moved forward, as if the jungle itself wanted to stop us. Along the way, we found signs that someone had recently passed through: broken branches, footprints in the muddy ground, and strange symbols carved into the trees. "I don't like this," murmured Soldier Mario, a veteran who rarely showed fear. "Those symbols, they look ancient." "Focus on the mission," I responded, though deep down I shared his unease. After a few hours, the path led us to a clearing in the jungle. In the center was a stone altar covered in moss and vines. It looked like it had been there since time immemorial. We approached cautiously, examining the place. "There's nothing here," said Corporal Cuevas, but his voice sounded uncertain. "Maybe this altar has some clue," I suggested. "Cuevas, Ruiz, check the surroundings. Mario and I will stay here." While the others explored the clearing, I began to inspect the altar. As I touched it, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something was not right. Suddenly I heard a scream. I turned and saw Cuevas running toward us, his face pale with terror. "Sergeant, we have to go! Now!" "What happened?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Ruiz, he just disappeared. We were checking some bushes and suddenly, he was gone, like the jungle swallowed him." Without wasting time, I gathered the team and we decided to return to the camp. But the path we had come on was no longer there. It was as if the jungle had changed around us. We were trapped. "This doesn't make sense," I said, trying to stay calm. "We couldn't have deviated that much." "It's like the jungle is playing with us," murmured Mario. We spent the night in the clearing, taking turns to keep watch. No one could sleep well, and in the darkness, the sounds of the jungle seemed more sinister than ever. At dawn, we decided to continue exploring, hoping to find a way out. The second day only got worse. We found more symbols carved into the trees, and at one point, we heard a blood-curdling scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. We moved faster, driven by a mix of fear and desperation. Then the unthinkable happened. Soldier Mario began to behave strangely. He murmured unintelligible things and looked around with wild eyes. "They're watching us," he repeated over and over. "They're hunting us." "Calm down, Mario," I said, trying to soothe him. "We'll find a way out." But Mario didn't listen. Suddenly, he ran into the jungle, screaming. We tried to follow him, but it was as if the jungle had swallowed him too. Now, there were only 3 of us, Cuevas, me, and the growing fear in our hearts. The 3rd night was the worst. We had taken refuge in another clearing, exhausted and desperate. Cuevas and I whispered to each other, trying to stay awake. "Do you think there's something behind all this, Sergeant?" asked Cuevas, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it's not natural." Suddenly, the air turned cold, and a figure emerged from the trees. It was tall, dark, and had red eyes that glowed in the dark. I felt an indescribable terror, as if my soul was being ripped from my body. "Cuevas, run!" I shouted, but my words seemed to have no effect. The figure approached slowly, and each step it took made the ground shake. At that moment, I remembered the stories I had heard as a child about demons and evil spirits that inhabited the darkest corners of the earth. But this was not a story. It was real. "Leave us alone!" I shouted, pointing my rifle at the figure, but I knew bullets would be no use against something like this. "You have desecrated this place," said a deep, resonant voice. "You have followed the forbidden path, and now you must face the consequences." Cuevas fell to the ground unconscious. I felt a sharp pain in my head, as if something was trying to penetrate my mind. But I couldn't give up, not after everything we had been through. "What do you want from us?" I asked, trying to stay firm. "Your soul," the demon replied, and its smile revealed a row of teeth as sharp as blades. The only option we had left was to fight, not with our weapons, but with our will. I remembered the words of an old shaman I had met years ago during a mission in the south. He said that demons could only be defeated by those who faced their own fears. I closed my eyes and tried to concentrate. I had to face my own fears, my own inner demons. I remembered my childhood, the difficult moments, and the decisions I had made. I remembered my family, my fallen comrades, and those who depended on me. The pain in my head began to diminish, and when I opened my eyes, the demon seemed less intimidating. "I am not afraid of you," I said firmly. The figure took a step back, and I could feel its surprise. "What are you doing?" it asked, its voice filled with fury. "Facing you," I responded. "I am not afraid of you. You cannot control us." The demon let out a deafening roar, but its power seemed to wane. Beside me, Cuevas began to move, waking from his unconsciousness. Together, we advanced toward the figure, which slowly faded away. "It cannot be," murmured the demon. "You cannot defeat me." "We already did," I said, and with a final scream, the figure disappeared, leaving behind an eerie silence. It took us hours to find our way back to civilization, but we did it. When we finally emerged from the jungle, we were changed men. We had faced something beyond comprehension and survived. Upon arriving at the base, we reported our experience, but few believed us. However, for us, there was no doubt about what we had faced. The devil's path was real, and those who ventured into it faced trials that tested their souls. I decided to leave the army shortly after that mission. I returned to my hometown, seeking the peace I had lost in the jungle. But the memory of that path and the demon we faced will never leave me. If you ever find yourself in the Chiapas jungle and see a path that shouldn't be there, remember my story. Do not follow the devil's path. Because once you enter, you never know if you will be able to leave. My name is Roberto, but in the squad, everyone calls me El Gato because of my ability to come out unscathed from situations that would be fatal for anyone else. I was born in a small town in the state of Veracruz, where life didn't offer many opportunities. Since childhood, I have always been restless and adventurous, which worried my parents but also prepared me for military life. At 18, I enlisted in the army seeking an escape, a purpose. I never imagined that I would find much more than that. Loyal friends, constant challenges, and above all, a destiny that would take me to the edge of reason and sanity. It was a moonless night, the kind of darkness that makes it difficult to distinguish between reality and imagination. Our mission was simple in theory: patrol a forested area near a small town in Chiapas where unusual activities had been reported. The locals spoke of strange lights and eerie sounds at night, but for us seasoned soldiers, it was just another day at the office. "Jimenez, make sure everyone is ready in 5 minutes," ordered Sergeant Reyes, a stern man with not a hint of humor. "Yes, Sergeant," I replied as I made sure the team was in order. The squad was composed of 6 men, each with a unique skill. We had known each other for years and had been through a lot together, but nothing had prepared us for what we were about to face. We ventured into the forest in formation, advancing cautiously. As we progressed, the vegetation became denser and the feeling of being watched intensified. After an hour of marching, we reached a clearing. What we saw there chilled us to the bone. There were makeshift crosses made of branches, lined up in uneven rows. They didn't look like formal graves, but rather a desperate attempt to mark the place where the dead rested. A sepulchral silence enveloped us, and the temperature seemed to have dropped several degrees. "What the hell is this?" murmured Rodriguez, one of the youngest in the group. "It looks like an improvised cemetery," said Morales, our communications expert, eyeing the crosses with distrust. We approached cautiously, and that's when the hallucinations began. First, it was Gutierrez who said he heard whispers coming from the ground. "I hear voices," he exclaimed, his eyes wide open. "Stop joking, Gutierrez," I responded, trying to stay calm, but deep down, I felt a growing unease. However, it didn't take long before we all started experiencing the same thing. The voices were soft, barely whispers, but unmistakable. They seemed to call our names, pleading for help, or perhaps seeking revenge. "What's happening, Sergeant?" asked Mario, visibly upset. "Stay calm and don't split up," ordered Reyes, though his voice betrayed an unusual nervousness. The voices weren't the only thing. Soon after, the visions began. I saw a man, clearly a soldier, with a torn uniform and a pale face standing next to one of the crosses. His eyes were empty pits of despair. "Who are you?" I asked, though I didn't expect an answer. "We died here," said the man in a hollow voice. "They abandoned us, and now we are trapped." "What do you mean?" I asked, but the figure vanished before I could get a response. The others also began to see the dead. Rodriguez screamed when he saw a woman with a baby in her arms, both with looks of anguish. Morales fell to his knees, crying as he tried to ward off the visions of small children playing among the crosses. Reyes decided it was time to move, but the clearing seemed to have us trapped. Every time we tried to leave, something stopped us. It was as if the forest was closing around us, preventing us from finding our way back. "We're trapped in this damn place," said Mario, the desperation in his voice evident. That's when we found a small cabin at the edge of the clearing. Inside, we discovered an old, handwritten diary. It belonged to a man named Alejandro, who had been part of a squad sent to the same area years ago. "The souls of the dead have trapped us," said one of the last entries. "The crosses are their graves. They are condemned to wander here forever, and anyone who comes too close will share their fate." The diary entries revealed a chilling truth. Alejandro's squad had been ambushed by a rebel group, and not receiving help, they died in the clearing. Their souls were left trapped, seeking vengeance, or perhaps simply company in their eternal solitude. "We have to get out of here before it's too late," said Reyes, closing the diary forcefully. But the crosses seemed to come alive. The voices grew louder, the dead more visible. It seemed that every step we took was watched by those who rested beneath the crosses. With hearts pounding, we decided to make one last attempt to escape. We formed a line and advanced together, ignoring the voices and visions surrounding us. "Don't stop!" shouted Reyes. "Keep moving!" The branches seemed to grab at us as if the forest itself was trying to stop us, but we didn't give up. After what felt like hours of struggle, we finally saw the moonlight through the trees. We had managed to leave the clearing. Back at the base, we tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed us. They said we had been victims of stress and fatigue, that our minds had played tricks on us in the darkness of the forest. But we knew the truth. Sometimes in my dreams, I still hear those voices. I feel that the dead in the clearing still call out to me, waiting for me to return someday. But I have learned to live with it, knowing that as long as I stay away from those crosses, my soul will be safe. Life goes on, and I, Roberto El Gato Jimenez, move forward with the certainty that in some dark corner of the world, the lost souls continue to seek their eternal rest. It all began when our squad of 8 soldiers received orders to patrol a remote region in the Chiapas jungle. There were rumors of drug traffickers' activities, and we needed to ensure the area was free of threats. Our mission seemed straightforward: explore, report, and return to base. But from the moment we arrived, things began to go awry. One afternoon, while exploring a particularly dense section of the jungle, one of my comrades, Corporal Morales, discovered a cave hidden among the vegetation. The entrance was partially covered by vines and branches, but what truly caught our attention was the large number of human skulls decorating the entrance, as if someone had placed those macabre relics there, on purpose to warn us of what lay inside. "Javier, do you see what I see?" Morales asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Yes, Morales, this doesn't look good at all," I replied, feeling a shiver run down my spine. Despite our reservations, we decided to enter. It was our responsibility to ensure there were no hidden dangers in that place. When we turned on our flashlights, the light revealed more skulls piled along the cave walls. Their empty sockets seemed to watch us with an eternal, lifeless gaze. The atmosphere became suffocating, and the air was heavy with a smell of dampness and decay. As we advanced, we started to hear whispers. At first, we thought it was the wind filtering through the cave's cracks, but soon it became clear that the sounds were not natural. The voices seemed to call our names, whispering in an unknown language that made our skin crawl. "You heard that, right?" asked Sergeant Ramirez, his face pale and sweaty. "Yes, but stay calm," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I really was. We continued our advance until we reached a larger chamber. In the center was a rudimentary altar made of stone, and on it, a larger skull decorated with symbols we didn't recognize. As we approached, the voices intensified, and the shadows began to move along the walls as if they were alive. "We need to get out of here! This isn't normal," said Soldier Gomez, backing toward the entrance. Before we could react, one of the shadows slid toward him and enveloped him. Gomez began to scream and convulse. His eyes turned white, and his body fell to the ground motionless. We tried to help him, but it was as if an invisible force repelled us. "Let's get out of here now," shouted Morales, and we all started running toward the exit. Back at the camp, we tried to explain what had happened, but no one believed us. Our superiors thought we had been victims of stress and fatigue, and that Gomez had suffered an epileptic seizure. But we knew the truth. From that day, the shadows and whispers began to follow us, even outside the cave. Each night, our tents were invaded by the same voices we heard in the cave. We woke up sweating, feeling watched. Several of my comrades began to fall ill, experiencing high fever and hallucinations. Sergeant Ramirez was the first to disappear. One night, he simply wasn't in his tent, and we couldn't find any trace of him anywhere. "This is killing us one by one, Javier," said Morales, his face gaunt and eyes sunken. "We need to find a way to stop this," I replied, feeling the desperation grow inside me. I remembered my grandmother's stories about spirits and how they sometimes sought revenge for disturbances in their sacred places. We decided to return to the cave, believing that perhaps there was a way to appease the entities that were haunting us. It was a desperate decision, but we had no other choice. Back in the cave, the atmosphere was even heavier than the first time. We approached the altar and, with fear, began to bury the skulls we found on its surface. We prayed, asking for forgiveness for our intrusion and begging for mercy. We didn't know if our words would be heard, but at that moment, It was our only hope. The shadows and whispers seemed to calm down as we worked. We felt a strange peace fill the cave, and for a moment, we believed it was over. But as we left, we realized someone was missing. Morales wasn't with us. "Morales!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the jungle's silence. There was no response. I returned to the cave, hoping to find him, but it was empty. His disappearance was a devastating blow. We knew the spirits had claimed another victim, and though the rest of us managed to return to the camp without further incident, the void left by our lost comrades was impossible to fill. The following days were a test of endurance. The shadows and whispers diminished but did not disappear completely. They remained, haunting us, reminding us that we had disturbed something ancient and powerful. The illness and fear wore us down, and one by one my comrades succumbed, either to the fever or the inexplicable accidents that began to occur. In the end, I was left alone. Guilt and despair consumed me, but I knew I had to continue, not for myself, but for the memory of my comrades. I left the army soon after, unable to face the reality of what I had lived through. I returned to Veracruz, hoping to find solace in the memories of my childhood and my grandmother's stories. But the shadows followed me. Sometimes, in the dark of night, I still hear their whispers, calling me by my name, reminding me that there are things in this world that should not be disturbed. And every time I see a skull, I remember the cave and the men I lost, and I realize that some fates cannot be avoided. The jungle has its secrets, and those who dare to unearth them must be prepared to face the consequences. This is my story, and I tell it not to scare, but to warn. Because sometimes legends and myths are more real than we are willing to believe. Our squad was assigned a reconnaissance mission in the southern Mexican jungle. There were rumors of armed groups' activity, and our job was to confirm and report. It was an inhospitable area, far from any trace of civilization, where nature was dense and hostile. We had been walking through the jungle for 3 days without finding anything out of the ordinary. The humidity was suffocating, and the insects wouldn't leave us alone. Morale was low, but we kept going. One night, while keeping watch around the camp, we heard a whisper. At first, we thought it was the wind playing among the branches, but the sound became clearer. It was a female voice, soft and distressed. "Help! Please help me!" The voice came from somewhere in the darkness. We looked at each other incredulously. What was a woman doing in the middle of the jungle at this hour? The lieutenant ordered us to prepare and cautiously advance toward the source of the call. With flashlights on and weapons ready, we ventured deeper into the thicket. It didn't take long to find her. She was a young woman with torn clothes and a disheveled appearance. Her eyes were full of fear and despair. "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" Lieutenant Ramirez asked firmly. "My name is Maria," she replied between sobs. "I got lost looking for my family. I need help." The woman seemed genuinely terrified, and we couldn't leave her alone in the jungle. We decided to take her back to the camp so she could rest and tell her story more calmly. Back at the camp, we gave her water and some food. Maria told us she had been looking for her family, who had disappeared in the jungle several days ago. She said they lived in a small settlement further in, but one night everyone disappeared without a trace. I searched for days, but couldn't find them. "Please help me find them," she begged us. Lieutenant Ramirez, though skeptical, decided that at dawn we would investigate the settlement. We needed to make sure it wasn't a trap. The next morning, we woke up to find that Maria had disappeared. There was no trace of her, as if she had never been there. "I don't like this at all," said El Negro Morales. "Something weird is going on here." Despite Maria's strange disappearance, we continued with the plan to investigate the settlement. After several hours of walking, we finally arrived. What we found left us chilled. The huts were in ruins, as if they had been abandoned long ago. There were no signs of life, just an eerie silence that gave us goosebumps. "This doesn't make sense," murmured La Rata Jimenez. "Where is Maria's family?" While exploring the place, El Lobo Cuevas found a half-buried diary. He opened it and began to read aloud. Today, my husband and children disappeared. Something in this jungle took them. I'm scared. If someone finds this diary, please help me find my family. Maria." We stood in silence, processing the information. Maria's story was real, but something terrible had happened to her family. That night, we kept watch again, nervous and alert. Suddenly, the same distressed voice of Maria echoed in the darkness. "Help! Please help me!" We ran toward the sound, and there she was, just like the previous night. She seemed not to remember having seen us before. "Maria, it's us! We helped you last night!" I shouted, trying to make her come to her senses. But she only repeated the same plea, as if trapped in an eternal loop of despair. Lieutenant Ramirez stepped forward and tried to touch her, but his hand passed through her as if she was smoke. At that moment, we understood the terrible truth. "She's a spirit," said El Gordo, Mario with a trembling voice. "She's trapped here, looking for her family." Panic took hold of us. We were facing something beyond our understanding, something we couldn't fight with weapons. We decided to abandon the settlement and return to the base, hoping to escape Maria's presence. But the jungle seemed unwilling to let us go. We walked in circles, unable to find our way back. Maria's voice followed us, increasingly desperate. "Help! Please help me!" Finally, exhausted and desperate, we found a clearing in the jungle where we decided to spend the night. During the watch, El Flaco Rodriguez began talking to himself as if someone were responding. "What are you doing?" I asked, worried. "She's telling me where to find her family," he replied, his eyes glazed. Before I could stop him, El Flaco ventured into the jungle. We followed, but soon lost sight of him. His voice faded into the distance. At dawn, we found El Flaco unconscious on the ground, murmuring incoherently. When he woke up, he didn't remember anything that had happened. "We have to get out of here," said Lieutenant Ramirez determinedly. "This isn't something we can handle." We managed to find our way back to the base after several days of forced march. We reported what had happened, but few believed us. The jungle kept its own secrets, and Maria, the woman of the jungle, continued to search for her family, trapped in an eternal torment. Every night when I close my eyes, I hear her voice. "Help, please help me." And I know that as long as she doesn't find peace, neither will we. Late in the summer, our squad was assigned a reconnaissance mission in a remote area of the Mexican jungle near the Guatemalan border. The objective was clear: investigate the disappearance of a scientific expedition that had vanished without a trace over 3 decades ago. We ventured into the jungle, following the trail of what was once Professor Emilio Salazar's expedition, a renowned archaeologist from the National University. There was something unsettling in the air. The silence was absolute, interrupted only by the crunching of leaves under our feet. "This place gives me the creeps," said Corporal Rios, a robust and always skeptical man. "Relax, Rios. We're just here to do a job," I replied, trying to keep the group calm. As we advanced, the vegetation became denser and the darkness seemed to swallow us. Finally, we arrived at what appeared to be the remains of the expedition's camp. The tents were torn and covered in moss, as if the jungle itself had tried to erase any evidence of human presence. We explored the area for clues. It was Sergeant Ramirez who found the first sign of something strange, a diary, soaked and covered in mold. "Look at this, guys," said Ramirez, holding the diary as if it were a treasure. We gathered around him as he began to read aloud. "June 21st, 1990. Something is following us. It's not an animal, I'm sure of that. The shadows move when we're not looking. Last night, one of the men disappeared without a trace. We're scared." The diary detailed how the expedition had begun to experience inexplicable phenomena. Shadows that seemed to have a life of their own, whispers in the night, and the disappearance of team members. As Ramirez read, a chill ran down my spine. I could feel something watching us from the jungle's darkness. "This is crazy," murmured Soldier Garcia. "There's no way this is real." But as the days passed, we began to experience things that defied all logic. Shadows moved in the corners of our eyes, and strange sounds echoed in the night. One night, while keeping watch, we heard a blood-curdling scream. We ran toward the sound, only to find that Corporal Rios had disappeared, leaving only his weapon and helmet on the ground. There were no signs of struggle, just an eerie silence. "What the hell is going on here?" shouted Ramirez, the desperation evident in his voice. We decided to stay together and remain alert, but the fear had already taken hold of our hearts. The next day, we found another diary buried under a pile of leaves. This one belonged to one of Professor Salazar's assistants. July 5th, 1990, we found a cave that isn't on the maps. Emilio thinks it's an important discovery, but I have my doubts. There's something in that cave, something that shouldn't be disturbed. We knew we had to find that cave to uncover the truth. Equipped with flashlights and weapons, we ventured into the jungle, following the diary's descriptions. After hours of searching, we found the entrance hidden among the vegetation. Inside, the air was cold and damp. The cave walls were covered in ancient inscriptions none of us could understand. We advanced cautiously until we reached an open chamber. There in the center was an ancient altar with ritual objects. Suddenly, Ramirez's flashlight began to flicker. A chilling whisper echoed through the cave. "We're not alone," I said, trying to control the tremor in my voice. The shadows around the altar began to move, taking shapes that were not entirely human. I felt a primal panic, a need to flee, but my legs wouldn't respond. "We need to get out of here," shouted Garcia. "Now!" Suddenly, the cave seemed to come alive. The shadows lunged at us. I fired, but the bullets passed through the figures without causing any harm. We ran toward the exit, abandoning any pretense of bravery. Once outside, we realized not all of us had made it out. Ramirez was missing, and there was no time to search for him. Terror drove us to keep running until we reached a safer area. That night, we huddled in a circle, trembling with fear. We didn't know if Ramirez was alive or dead, but we knew something ancient and malevolent was hunting us. While resting, Garcia found one last diary, belonging to Professor Salazar himself. July 12th, 1990. I made a grave mistake. The cave wasn't an archaeological find, but a sacred site, a resting place for entities that shouldn't be disturbed. Now we've unleashed their wrath, and I don't know if we'll escape alive. The professor's words resonated with an inescapable truth. We had awakened something that didn't belong to this world, and now we were paying the price. The following nights were hell. The men started disappearing one by one without a trace. Every time we tried to move, the shadows followed us, whispering promises of death and madness. On the last day, only Garcia and I remained. Exhausted and on the brink of despair, we decided to make one last trek to a clearing we had seen on the map. We hoped that daylight might offer us some protection. When we reached the clearing, we found an ancient pyramid covered in vegetation. We climbed to the top, where we found a small structure. Inside were inscriptions that seemed to be a warning or a spell. "What do we do now, Tigre?" asked Garcia, his eyes filled with fear and desperation. "I don't know," I replied, feeling the weight of uncertainty. Maybe this is where we make our last stand. But before we could decide our next move, the shadows reached us. This time there was no escape. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and suddenly everything went dark. I woke up in a military hospital, not remembering how I got there. They told me I had been found unconscious in the jungle, but there was no trace of Garcia or the rest of my team. Now, as I write this, I can still hear the whispers in the darkness. I know something follows me, something that won't leave me alone until it finds what it seeks. Since that day, the Mexican jungle is a place I avoid at all costs. The memories of what we found there still haunt me, and the nights are especially hard. The doctors say it's post-traumatic stress, but I know the truth. Something ancient and malevolent was awakened, and although I escaped with my life, I'm not sure how much longer I can stay safe. Sometimes in the dark of night, I can see the shadows moving in the corner of my eye, and the whispers return, reminding me that the horror is not over.